The Clakkers are a race of chicken men and women that are featured very prominently in Oddworld Stranger's Wrath, with the first half of that game being set primarily within their cities and civilization. As a result, we get to have a fascinating up-close look at this unique species, but hopefully not too up close with a face like that. The Clakkers have established tons of settlements in the west of the continent of Mudos, blatantly inspired by the frontier towns in the old west of America. The rapid growth of their population in the area was caused by a great migration of their species westwards, compelled by stories of unlimited prosperity. During this era, known as the expansion period, they began to occupy areas where the native grubs have been run out of their land. This was apparently inspired by the settlement of American and Australian settlers and the lack of care about the disastrous impact their migration had on native people in their respective lands. As a result, Oddworld creator Lorne Lanning characterised their species as having condescending elitist attitudes and conservative thought. As a result, the Clakkers are shown to be immensely arrogant.
I need to know where the bounty store is.
I got other things to be worried about. Now go buzz off.
Having a bad attitude and intolerant of pretty much all species, including their own. It's very easy for Clakkers that are somewhat different to be ostracised and be the victim of the town gossip among the rest of their very sociable species. This is even if the Clakker is different in a way that's blatantly beneficial to them. No matter what their fellow Clakker is doing to improve their society, the rest of them will always find something to complain about.
You're such a lazy ass. Damn, can you the world needs lazy Clakkers like...
Much as they do to Stranger when he returns victorious after defeating an outlaw that's been terrorising them. That's gratitude for ya. I actually really love this characterisation though, because I think this makes them maybe the most human or relatable characters in the Oddworld franchise, because so many people are exactly the same. So often I'm sure you've experienced people where like no matter what, they'll just find something to complain about in any situation, even if it's good or beneficial to them. I mean obviously there's reasonable complaints to things and whatever, I'm just talking about the people that will just constantly find something wrong with anything.
Woo-wee, you're kicking ass! Make sure you get them all because we ain't coming out until then.
And this is what I like about the Clakkers. As a whole, they're probably the most human characters in the entire Oddworld franchise, arguably. Or represent a very relatable aspect of humanity at least. The civilization of the Clakkers is basically Oddworld's representation of modern or close to modern human civilization, or at least the Clakkers themselves are the closest representation to the average human living in Western civilization that we've seen so far. Back to their opinions on the Stranger though, Clakkers are willing to tolerate things they don't like, albeit openly with reluctance if it benefits them, which is why they accept Stranger into their towns to take care of their outlaw problems, even though they don't much like strange folk in their villages.
Yeah, well, I hope you told them to stick it where the sun don't shine. Don't need no more weirdos in this town than we already have, you know.
It comes as no surprise then to hear that the Clakkers likewise have little interest or remorse for the grubs, whose lands they've moved into.
Bunch of superstitious, silly little shits.
Only being concerned with their own lives and whatever happens to be affecting them. Easily irritated by anything really, the Clakkers' personalities are maybe one of my favourite things in Stranger's Wrath. They're probably the biggest providers of comic relief in the game, with their wisecracks, potty mouth and just general bad attitude. They're probably one of the funniest things in the entire Oddworld franchise. Speaking to to them, or even just overhearing their conversations among each other, is also something that provides the player with tons of information and world building. There's actually a ton of information that you wouldn't get unless you have the patience to wait around and listen to what the Clakkers are saying to each other in specific moments, talking about what's going on in the story of the game, as well as the backstory of the characters and whatever.
Good luck finding one, though. I haven't heard of a Steve in these parts for, well...
building up the lore in an incredibly subtle way, and in turn I think this gives them and their society a great sense of realism. The Clakker civilization is probably one of the only civilizations that we've gotten to fully experience and live in an Oddworld game. You can tell careful care was put into developing the Clakkers and making their cities feel truly alive. Even small things like having the Clakkers be different sizes from one another. I've seen some comically tiny Clakkers before, although apparently their average size is 5 to 6 feet tall. The Clakkers seem to occupy a unique position in Oddworld society. They're without a doubt an industrial civilization, yet they seem so primitive compared to the other industrialist species we've seen in Oddworld. Despite using technology that's clearly made by the Viker scientists, as is the case in Eastern Mudos seen in the other games, the technological advancements in Western Mudos seem so archaic in comparison. They seem almost out of time due to their Old West inspiration. But this isn't relegated to just their species. The whole area seems as though it's from another era, but then again, these are villages that have been built by the Clakkers. Maybe its primitive nature is due to how seemingly impromptu these shanty towns are, as it's not certain whether the Clakkers had intended to settle where they did, with them perhaps not willing to go past the Great River, or maybe that just happened to be where their trailers broke down during their migration. And also I like the pun of the birds having a great migration. Another telling aspect of their limited technology is in their combat capabilities.
What's your problem? Stop that now, you crazy farmer! Now, you stinky turd! Don't get us all ruffled up!
Clakkers are shown to be pretty pathetic, panicking and running around like headless Clakkers when presented with danger. They seem to take on a primarily defensive position when they're threatened, with it being their standard procedure to instantly shelter within their buildings. While their smaller shanty towns are almost left at the mercy of those who take advantage of them, completely vulnerable to being razed to the ground, the biggest Clakker settlements are better protected and will actually fight back. Their destruction is prevented by the Clakkers getting their rifles and taking pop shots out their windows at anyone that's causing trouble. That being said, some Clakkers are capable of taking up arms and going on the offensive, with some, for example Cornjaws, the retired Sleg Hunter, taking up such dangerous occupations. Clakkers were first unveiled in a special film called The X Factor inside Microsoft's Xbox. Upon seeing these new species, Oddworld fans took to calling them Hickens, a term coined by user Ron Rancor. Eventually, Lorne Lanning revealed their real name in a Q&A. The Clakkers were inspired by a postcard Lorne Lanning spotted in a nature store, which depicted what he described as an angry as hell looking bald eagle. He apparently bought the card and sent it to Silvio A. Abisha to use as a reference for designing the creatures, which he instructed should retain absurdity and goofball qualities. As a result of this, it was decided to base the Clakkers instead on chickens, as they're more funny and kind of annoying in comparison. Inspiration was also taken from other farm animals such as pigs, and concept art actually shows what looks like basically a pig version of a Clakker alongside them. Oinkers. Another reason these creatures were chosen to shape the Clakkers was seemingly due to a desire to suggest their boring and mundane lifestyles. This was indicated by all the Clakkers, regardless of whether they're lazy or hard-working, being overweight with double chins and saggy, fatty skin that would surely taste great fried in batter. I'd imagine their weight is likely a reason that, despite being avians, they're unable to fly, with the feathers on the tips of their wings acting like fingers instead. Which explains how they're able to do the hard manual labour that beings in societies of the level of industrialisation that the Clakkers are normally end up doing. The Clakkers tend to do tough work, such as farmers and tradesmen, despite their sedentary lifestyle. Perhaps one of the aspects that makes the Clakkers stand out is the fact that female members of the species seem to be as common as male members. This makes them incredibly unique within the Oddworld franchise, where the most prominent races are generally shown as being super species, primarily made up of males with a female queen that gives birth to all members of their respective races. Instead, Clakkers seemingly reproduce by mating and laying eggs, like chickens, and young Clakkers are also seen in the game, albeit briefly. Although female Clakkers are prominent, it's interesting to note that they're extremely similar to the male members of their species due to low sexual dimorphism, to the point that they basically just look like male Clakkers but with makeup, women's clothing, and two massive chicken breasts at KFC, order now for $9.99. Clakker settlements in Stranger's Wrath are shown to be along the Mongo River, which has been drained by the Secto Springs Bottled Water Company. It's suggested that this happened before the Clakker migration there, as some of the biggest cities are right on the water side, even at its low water level. And not to mention, after the dam is eventually broken, the Clakker towns are flooded. Although their villages are wiped out, the Clakkers themselves, albeit put out, have survived. But with so many of their shanty towns destroyed by this event, it's unknown what the status of their civilization will be. Perhaps they'll go back to where they came from. Speaking of which, here's a thought I had while writing this video. If the Clakkers migrated westward to Western Mudos, does that basically mean they originate from Eastern Mudos? Because if so, it must have been a pretty comprehensive migration, because literally every Oddworld game apart from Stranger's Wrath is set in Eastern Mudos, yet Clakkers have never been depicted as being there. Wait, unless Mudokons evolved from birds. Are the Clakkers just what happens to lazy fat Mudokons in a sunnier environment? I doubt it. To be fair, the Clakkers are basically consumers that consume products, and as a result, I'd assume if the Clakkers are in Eastern Mudos, we'd probably see them in the industrial cities, such as Nolibab maybe. So far, all the games that have been set in this part of the continent have been either in factories or native areas, places the Clakkers and consumers such as them would avoid. Even in Stranger's Wrath, the Clakkers are pretty much never seen alongside the native grubs, and are pretty much entirely absent from the game once it switches over to the native areas. Or maybe the Clakkers are from like Central Mudos or something, just somewhere in the middle between West and East. Mudos is a massive continent after all. Either way, one of the things I love about Oddworld Stranger's Wrath is how much world building is done when it comes to the Clakkers. I love spending time in their cities, just taking in the atmosphere, and that trademark cantankerous Clakker attitude really gives the game so much humour and personality, and that's why I absolutely love the Clakkers.
Hello, follow me.